Um, I have been wanting to write an essay about, or that's not right. I finished my thesis for grad school last year, and it was all about the Manosphere, the Greek system, and rape culture at my undergrad, CU Boulder. Um, and I'd say if I were to encapsulate my thesis, I was most interested in talking about how the Greek system is a threat to the democratic process because of its intense nepotism and its training for men to be able to see violence and keep secrets about it, and like pretty much just makes a bunch of little Trumps and Epsteins. Um, I have a lot of people in my life that were in Greek life. My dad was the president of IFC at his alma mater, and I'd say 99% of my friends from Boulder were in Greek life, and this is something that I have talked to all of them about extensively. And I think even though I wasn't in a sorority, I was like inescapably entrenched in Greek life. Um, and I experienced its cultural impacts on the school and like the consequences of those very profoundly. And it contributed deeply to not only being raped, but the social reactions to that, and the gaslighting, silencing, and what eventually made me very sick. I have a lot of chronic illnesses. I just had my third surgery for endometriosis in April. As a result of that, have vein disease in my legs that I'm still taking care of. I pretty much stopped being able to like properly like digest food and go to the bathroom, and I have a thyroid disease and an autoimmune disease, and I also really struggled with my mental health for a long time. Not to say that I don't anymore, but I, take medication for it, whatever, la la la. And it's been a long time. But I read more than 50 books for my thesis, and I've always wanted to make kind of like um, give recommendations for my favorites, especially because I have kind of tired myself out with this research because the manosphere has become so mainstream, and so everything that I was researching is now pretty common knowledge. And so I thought it would be fun to go over the books that gave me a deeper understanding of what that was, because the manosphere has really been an issue since the early 2000s, and it is a construction. It's a very purposeful construction. And it has a lot of overlaps with fascism and white supremacy, and obviously the suppression of women's rights. And I could go on, but I'm just going to go through some of the books that I love and some of the books that I don't like. And I'm missing some of my copies, so I'm going to try to remember to mention ones that are missing. I'm going to start out with The Right to Sex, which was by Amia Srinivasan. She is based in the UK. She's Indian. She talks a lot about UK culture, Indian culture, and American culture in this book. She talks about all of her essays are issues that she doesn't have an answer to because of their complexity, but she talks about men feeling like they have an innate entitlement to sex, like they're born to be given sex from women, and they feel like they're being robbed if they don't have sex. She also has a great chapter on porn, and like the debate around pornography, whether or not it should exist, what happens when porn is and sex work is actually regulated, and who that ends up affecting. So if you're interested in any of those topics, this is for you. This was the first book that I read. I read this in undergrad, and it was the first book that I read that kind of confirmed for me that I wasn't crazy, because I experienced like 2 full-on psychotic breaks in undergrad, because of such intense gaslighting from women, actually, that I lived with, and for things that were very objectively, like, I was not in the wrong. And it, whatever. If you've ever been, I feel like, gaslighting gets thrown around a lot now. Obviously, we know that it's become a very commonplace term. To actually have someone make you feel like you can't understand reality is such an unbearable experience. I think had I not been at school with my husband Aiden, I probably would have had to drop out, or I would have like seriously hurt myself, because I was so I felt like the worst irredeemable person for having PTSD, and trying to ask for help, because whatever. Anyways, this is about the books, but this is a great book for, I guess, like a philosophical debate about what are we going to do with men that are creating this cycle of rape culture and our dependency on porn, and the psychological effects. It's great. I really want her to come out with another book. She's one of my favorite authors. I don't have my copy here. I have no idea where it went. But right after this, I read Men Explain Things to Me, which is a really short essay by Rebecca Solnit. And it is overviewing how the silencing of women turns into killing women. And it's, I don't want to say too much about it because you could read it in a day, but that is a really fantastic essay. And I also read at this time Against White Feminism by Rafia Zakaria, who is another one of my favorite essayists. That is a book largely about the impractical and self-centered nature of white feminists, especially second wave white feminists who just like try to go to other countries and insert themselves from, like, they think that all issues are stemming from a lack of education, which I'll use one example. There was this feminist that went to rural villages in India and wanted to bring ovens, like electric ovens and stoves, to these women who were using like coal and whatever, something that is not great to breathe in, but is a perfectly suitable way to cook in a rural place and has been used for thousands of years. And just how pointless it is to do that, because how are you going to get a maintenance person out there when it inevitably breaks? How are you going to cook the same food in this completely different oven that can't get as hot? And she goes on about that. She also does a really great job of she had a really terrible experience with abuse, and after she came to the US with her ex-husband, who was extremely violent, she feared for her life, ended up having to flee to a women's shelter. And so she talks about her experience there. And it's just, I think, especially for a lot of these books are written by women of color, and obviously, as we're getting into new phases of feminism and deepening our understanding of intersectionality, I think that's a really great book for, I think all of these books that I'm going to recommend are really great for kind of, if you haven't learned about the importance of intersectional feminism and what it actually means to apply those principles to feminism globally, great book to start with. Okay, then let's go to, oh, this is one of my favorites. This is probably the book I would recommend the most to everyone right now when we're talking about trad wives. This is called Right Wing Women by Andrea Dworkin. I love Andrea Dworkin. Some people are going to tell you, like, oh, Andrea Dworkin has weird takes on porn and sex workers. I actually disagree with that. I think that the public and like proprietors of the sex positive movement have really misconstrued her stance on porn. I am very anti-porn. I am not anti-sex worker. Sex work will exist forever. It always has. But we must ask ourselves, why does it exist? Why do women need to do it? Why is sex work, and especially pornography, as degrading as it is? And I actually would take the stance that it's not pornography that shapes our cultural perception of sex. It is our cultural perception of sex that informs pornography. Violence against women and having violent sex long preceded pornography. And that's what sells. So, anyways, this is Andrea Dworkin is a militant feminist from the 70s. She is extremely unforgiving, and this book is all about women who negotiate their proximity to the patriarchy in an attempt to make themselves exempt from its oppression, which we see right now with Trump, like MAGA women and like Ballerina Farm and all that crap, and being a 19-year-old bride that gets pregnant and doesn't want to leave the house and wants to submit to her husband. I have been to a wedding that was all about submission, and it was like just jarring. And I also think, as someone who just got married and is married quite young, I've been married for almost a year now, I get asked a lot about the dynamics of my relationship, and I have a very untraditional marriage. My husband is much more of the domestic one than I am. I used to be told growing up that I would never find someone who would want to be with a woman who didn't clean, which is so stupid. And I mean, I honestly did get really lucky in that sense, because that's true. Luckily, I am with someone who really likes to clean, but that negotiation would never, like, that, if I was a man, that would have never been a conversation. My dad doesn't clean. It's not to say he's not a helpful person, but he is not a homemaker, and I don't think anyone would have ever expected him to be a homemaker. And for me, that just gets put aside as me being incredibly lazy and whatever. But that's obviously not the only issue of my marriage that people take, but that is honestly a completely different topic. Also something I'm very interested in talking about more, but whatever. Everyone should read this now. It's one of my favorite books of all time. Another Andrea Dworkin piece that I love. This book is called Last Days at Hot Slit. It is a collection of essays and chapters from her writing, all of her writing. My favorite essay from this, what is it called? I want a 24-hour truce during which there is no rape. It is my favorite piece of writing ever that is about what it means to be a feminist man. Because she says in this speech, it is completely possible to have a day where no one gets raped. There's no necessity for it. It is a choice. And she says, she was like, until that happens, I will not be more lenient towards men, and especially men who say they are feminists. They're also in Right-Wing Women. She talks about the sexual revolution and how that was a pretty much like a marketing strategy by conservative men who found that they could also control women in the left-wing movement, and like had created this umbrella of false empowerment. And I'm not saying that you can't have empowerment in sexuality. Obviously, my work is very pornographic, very sex forward, I guess, or just even like includes a lot of nudity. That's not my issue, but there are aspects of the sexual revolution that clearly do not benefit women, and she kind of talks about the beginnings of that and how that is really a male construction. I guess going off of that book, Bell Hooks' The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love is also a lot about weaponized incompetence, and that the issue of men not loving women and understanding women is a choice. And even though you can be socialized to hate women, that doesn't remove the responsibility for you to change. I love this book. I think that women who are in relationships with men who really do want to be different but don't necessarily know how to do that past like a surface level should read this book. I think that, women should read it too, because I think it creates a fantastic what you should expect of a partner, and I think that especially in straight relationships you should expect a lot. And that at the beginning of your relationship, you don't want to be teaching a man how to be respectful and good to you. I think that that's exhausting, but also to pretend like that isn't an aspect of a lot of dynamics between men and women is silly. When Aiden and I started dating, I made him read this, and I made him read this too, and a lot of other things, because I don't, call me crazy, but I wanted to feel like when we had conversations about feminism and men and the Manosphere, especially because Aiden grew up around a lot of men that really take that perspective. And when I met him, a couple of his roommates were very women hating without even realizing it. Like, they would never say that they were, but they were. A lot of Joe Rogan, a lot of Kanye West, a lot of, all that BS. And, you can be a perfectly well-intentioned man and still just be completely ignorant to your own biases. We know that with racism, homophobia, whatever, we know that that is a natural part of being socialized in this country, this world, whatever. But this is great for that. Going closer to the Manosphere, this is my favorite book about the Manosphere of all time. It was written in 2019, first Trump admin. She lays out the entire plan for this presidency. Now we all know about the Heritage Foundation. We know about Charlie Kirk. We know about Turning Point USA. She talks about the plan for all of this in this book. It is so good. It is uncanny what she predicts. It's so amazing. It's so short. It's such a fast read. I love this book. I love this book. I will probably reread this 100 times throughout my life. If I had to give someone like a package of books as a present for like their Manosphere education, it's these two. Okay. Going off of that, I think when we talk about the Manosphere, it's really important to go back to the beginnings of fascism. And not only, I think the comparison that should be made between the Manosphere and Nazi Germany and Mussolini is how backed fascist leaders are and were by large American corporate companies. JP Morgan is a great example of a institution that loves to financially back and protect fascists. They did that a ton with Mussolini. I mean, we just saw how they were involved with Jeffrey Epstein and were ignoring reports from their own associates. This book is a great encapsulation of the kind of hysteria and myth-making required to justify fascism, and just like people believing their own bullshit, and men's ability to fantasize about a utopia that is like completely self-centered when we're talking about a white ethno-state, which is the goal of this administration. When we see mass deportations and a rise in pronatalism and with white people, and I mean earlier, a few years ago, we saw that the Trump administration was attempting to add more bus routes for towns that were primarily white, and there was also alongside it a mission to get white women in these towns to have more kids. We're seeing that a lot now with Erica Kirk. They keep going on TV and she's like, have more babies than you can afford, which is just nuts, especially in this economy. But that was a huge aspect of Nazi Germany, is being a good Nazi was to also have a nuclear family and have a shit ton of kids. Not a coincidence. This also does a great job of talking about metapolitics, which is a huge aspect of how the ideas of the manosphere have permeated our culture. Metapolitics are like pretty much making an idea that is really extreme culturally normal, so that when it is introduced at a federal level, people are already used to it. Anti-abortion, climate denial, which I guess I should segue into this book, Post-Truth, when I am using climate denial as an example. Post-Truth is an overview of lying in the news, how the news industry got started, and how private news networks have a financial incentive for viewership, and how that kind of incentivizes exaggeration and lies. He uses the example of the tobacco industry and climate change. His point is basically just that there's not always two sides to every story, and pretending that there are two sides that have equal weight has created our idea that climate change is up for debate. It's not. Same with tobacco being bad for you. It is bad for you. And so good. How he talks about how like big oil is responsible for campaigns against climate change, and how the media is like required to show both sides of every story. We just saw this too with the New York Times. They were investigated, and it was just found that they contributed to anti-trans narratives, and that had an influence on our cultural understanding of trans folks. So good. Going off of that, I am going to talk about the economization of life. I got this book secondhand at a rare bookstore, or not even a rare bookstore, it was a thrift store in, I wouldn't even say it was a thrift store. If you're still in Providence, I really recommend going. This man has a wonderful selection of books. It's right across the street from the RISD library. There's also like clothes and other odd little items in there. I got this there, and he recommended it to me. This is about the bell curve and how the bell curve has been used to justify eugenics, and has pretty much given like scientific backing to racism, which I think is hugely important for understanding not only where that false like idea that Black people are less intelligent or less human than white people comes from in the modern age, because, you know, once slavery was abolished and Black people were starting to have financial success in this country and really being able to build themselves up, there's another book that I have. I cannot remember what it's called because I cannot find my copy, but it is about the history of Black banks and how our financial institutions have historically stopped Black folks from creating financial success for themselves, which is so important to understanding all of this too. But this is a really interesting book about the bell curve specifically, and GDP, and how GDP is related to eugenics. So good. After that, let's do, I guess, my books that are more specifically related to fraternities. I think that the Greek system should be abolished. I have no issue with there being a social club at schools, but why it isn't co-ed and more regulated and so reserved for the ultra wealthy is absolutely insane to me. My favorite book about fraternities, and specifically about the history of SAE, is nowhere to be found. I think some of my books got lost in my move, but I will have to find the name of it. But it talks about fraternities are a pre-Civil War institution. They are so racist. So racist. I cannot even begin to stress how much they are built on separatism. They are so bad. They are built by the Confederate elite in an attempt to separate themselves from black people. And now, in the modern age, you know, every other diverse person in the US at state schools. They also, when you're like, oh, but there's black fraternities and there's even sororities exist because women weren't allowed in fraternities. They were not created together. Sororities were created because women wanted to be a part of the social clubs. Black fraternities, Latino, like whatever, Jewish fraternities, that they're also so anti-Semitic. So anti-Semitic. You want to talk about anti-Semitism in this country? Let's talk about fraternities. They are awful. They are so filled with oh my god. Fraternity gang rape. The Secret History of the Rape Kit. Rape in fraternities, I would say in the modern age, is the purpose. I'm not saying everyone that goes into Greek life is a rapist, but you are not going to convince me that if you were in a frat, you didn't know about rape culture. Even if you never saw someone assaulted or you didn't know that someone was a rapist in your fraternity, you are not going to convince me that you had never heard that that was an issue. I mean, especially Boulder. When I was at Boulder, the year before I got there, there was a case of a fraternity roofing like tens of girls from a sorority that many of my girlfriends were in with Xanax in wine bags. And they were kicked off campus because of that and kicked out of what's it called? It's not kicked out of IFC, the Interfraternal Council, because of that. So then they just became like a free range house full of sociopathic boys who are then held to no standard of they're lawless, because also the police don't do anything. And because these men are so conditioned to hide violence and protect each other for no reason other than them being boys, you can pretty much do whatever you want. Men in Boulder buy roofies as groups on Halloween weekend every year. Everyone knows that. Everyone. Doesn't stop anyone from going to the parties, doesn't stop anyone from joining. There was another case, I think my sophomore year, where a girl was roofied and gang raped with fake cocaine. She was either gang raped by a few people or with a foreign object, but nothing happened. There were protests outside the fraternity house, which was kind of like this L-shaped apartment complex on a corner, and they had this like corner lawn. The only thing that happened is they got a fence. They got a metal fence that had spikes on top. Must have been like 8 feet tall. That's all that happened. And I could go on, but I'm not going to. I think that everyone should have a greater understanding of the harms that fraternities cause, because I also think they're a lot worse than they used to be. I think that they are a much more sinister institution now than they were before, which, after explaining their beginnings, should be extremely alarming. I would never let my son join a fraternity. Like, ever. Easiest way to, like, if you're worried about your child becoming involved in just becoming a rapist, don't let him join a frat. Simple as that. Going off of that, I guess I'll end with this. Killing Rage by Bell Hooks. My whole thesis was an art installation about the desire to kill your rapist. And that it is healthy for women to be able to express anger, and that they need to so they don't get sick, because I am not the only woman in the world that is sick from trauma. I also, like, it's not a white woman's issue. A lot of chronic illness, I believe, is under-researched, not only because it affects women, but because it mostly affects Black women, which I think is another attempt at eugenics, which I have developed that perspective based on ratings from The Economization of Life, based on Thick by Tressie McMillan Cottom, who is one of my favorite authors. She is a columnist at the New York Times. She's so based. Everything she says, I agree with. Like, not to be, indiscriminate, but I love her. She has a heartbreaking chapter in this book about her experience losing her baby, because her pain was not believed at the doctor. It was preventable. And the things that these people say to her, this medical staff, even after she has lost her child, is so disgusting. And just, like, I have rarely cried reading nonfiction books. This book is so special. It is so good. There's so many essays in it that I used within my thesis research. She also has a chapter that is fantastic about the kind of, like, what whiteness is and how flexible it is, because it's not real, and it is just used as a barometer to oppress Black people, because, we used to hate the Irish and hate Italians, and now it's like, if you're white here, you're white, and that whiteness can change, and it changes in order to keep this protected class and continue a pro-natalist, white supremacist dialogue. But her story, I think, is really important for understanding medical malpractice and racism in medicine. And I guess going off of that, I want to talk about a book that I love and a book that I hate. I think a huge part of research with rape culture, you also have to be doing research on pedophilia. And I absolutely hate the book Lolita. I hate the concept of it. I hate everything about it. I think it is so stupid that is our cultural baseline for a pedophilic relationship. It romanticizes it. So many people use it as a fantasy. Even though I am a very anti-porn person, I do a lot of research on Pornhub, and it is terrifying. The top category is always teenager. For a while, Pornhub changed the teenager category to 18 to 25, and now it's back. And I was looking at some of their reporting on the website, and they were like, our top category is MILF. No, it's not. It's teenagers. And if you look at the titling of porn, which I am certain everyone watching this video has seen something along these lines, where it's like, teenage stepsister gets her virginity taken by big old guy, whatever, disgusting things. And, you know, the amount of times that these are actual children, or like barely legal girls, or girls that have been trafficked, or just rape videos, is insane. I don't think that should be our, I guess, investigation into a pedophile's mind. If you are wanting a book that is from the perspective of a pedophile, this is it. I love Toni Morrison. She's my favorite author of all time. I read all of her books, except I'm halfway through Jazz, and I never got to read Love, which I need to. But The Bluest Eye is an extremely heartbreaking book, but there are two pedophiles in the book, and she writes from their eyes, and like their self-justification for being pedophiles. And I think that she has a profound talent for creating a universe that is so convincing. It is like she has lived in every character's mind. I have never read anyone that even compares to her. I will stand her forever, but I just think this book, like, if you are gonna read, like, throw out your Lolita book and read this instead, because there's no fantasy here. There's no romanticism. You are disgusted and appalled by these men. And I think that it is fantastic. The last book I'm going to talk about, because I see a lot of women who are doing similar work to me, using this book as a reference, and I think it's so whatever. It's called Theory of the Young Girl. I think it should be really called Theory of the Young White Girl, and even today it could be Theory of the Young White Ozempic Influencer. This book it's talking about capitalizing on your body and selling yourself for the purpose of societal approval and just pretty much like commodifying yourself. But it is only, it's a book that can really only be related to from the perspective of someone who can achieve a Eurocentric aesthetic. You pretty much have to be a white girl for this to apply to you. And I think it does kind of encapsulate what our cultural preference for beauty is. And it definitely could highlight the impossibility of achieving beauty in the US or Europe. I mean, these things are everywhere. But I think if you're going to read it and you're going to use it as a reference, it should be read from a critical viewpoint, because I don't find this book to be relatable, and I think that it is quite narrow. It's set up like this. It's a lot of like little quotes and thoughts. I'll read. I have pages folded that I'm not super sure what I was specifically highlighting. Sorry for the pause. Um, I mean, it's definitely a good book when we're talking about trad wives, influencers, the absolute uh, resurgence of the skinny epidemic. Um, it's good for some person. I feel like an influencer would fucking love this book. She'd be like, "Woe is me!" Like, ugh, it's so hard to be me. And there's aspects of it that ring true. I'm not saying that I don't struggle with these things, but I think that it's missing a lot of pieces. Um, and I think that every other book that I have talked about that has to do with the struggle that it is to be a woman are better than this. Um, but yeah, that is my extremely long winded, poorly planned book review. Um, but I've always wanted to kind of give more context to people that I didn't go to school with on where my perspective comes from because I have quite an extreme perspective. Or, I mean, I don't think it's extreme, but a lot of other people do. Um, and if you ever have any other questions about books, please ask me. I think that reading is paramount to being a good democratic citizen. I think that it is important to have physical books too. I'm a big rereader, which is why I'm sad that I've lost so many of my books. Because soon books will be unavailable. There's already been a lot of book banning, and I don't think that we should be naive in thinking that that's going to stop. Um, and I just, get pissed, stay pissed, and don't let your bum boyfriends not read. Like, don't date an idiot. But that's for another conversation. I hope you enjoyed, and that's what I gotta say. Thanks.